Well, now tell me this. How do I find the tombstone so I can make a
The
picture of
tombstone
it?
is still in the burying lot down in what is now King and Queen County,
Okay.
Poropotank Creek. There was some question. Mrs. Edie McDonald was working on that. I haven't heard from her for a number of years. But she was trying to get it put over in Stratford Major Churchyard. That's a church, the Episcopal church of that time in King and Queen. But I don't think they did it. I think it's still enclosed in the brick wall cemetery down on the plantation where he was granted his acreage by the Purse of Burgesses. So there's no doubt but what he was the man, don't you see?
Yes.
Now that territory was granted to him, and his descendants his grandson became Warner Hall.
The Lewis of Warner Hall.
Exactly. So there's no question about it. There can't be any question about it.
Okay.
Whereas Robert Lewis, they had no proof, but I do think from research I did in Wales, he was Robert of the Van, which was a very prominent branch. The Lewises, all of them, were well placed in Wales. And
But you don't think that Robert and James were brothers?
No, James. Robert
and John.
Oh, no. John Lewis was an old man when he came over here. He was 60 or so. He'd been top man for the king in the county. And most people were dead by that time at that generation.
Mm-hmm. So you think Robert Lewis was Robert of the Van?
Yeah, and they were the Dukes of Dorset. They were very prominent place. They were probably socially higher than my John Lewis's branch, but not genealogically. I can prove that my John Lewis came from Paradox.
Who owns the land now where the cemetery is?
It was sold a number of times early in the 1800s, and I really don't know who owns it now. But under the law of Virginia, no matter who buys the land, the cemetery belongs to the family, and they can't touch it.
Okay.
That's sacrosanct in Virginia, always. So it will be there forever.
And what's the name of the cemetery?
It has none. It's the Lewis Cemetery at the Lewis Plantation on Poropotank Creek.
On Poropotank Creek. Is that named today, Poropotank?
Sometimes it's called Lewis Creek. It's Porotanke.
Okay. So I should be able, by looking at a county map with the creeks on it, be able to locate the cemetery.
Either Poropotank or Lewis.
And that's King and Queen County?
It's quite near West Point.
Oh,
it's
all right.
in what was at one time Gloucester and became King and Queen.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to go down there probably next week.
If you do, and if you take a picture of it, will you save one?
I will put it on this videotape.
Will you?
Yes, it'll be on this videotape plus a picture. So when you get a copy of the videotape back, you'll get a videotape of it and also a photograph.
I've not gotten down there.
Well, I will get you one. I sure will, because I want to put it on the end of this tape.
That's where the immigrant lived, you see, and died 4 years later. And was inherited by his son, whom he brought from Wales, and I got the son's baptismal record in the same parish where his father was married.
Well.
And his two sons, the second one, the first son was an Edward, and I want to tell you something interesting. I come from both of those sons. Edward, who stayed at the King and Queen County, and John, who married the Warner girl. That is the most known. But that line that stayed in King and Queen was very prominent too. And that was Edward Lewis. And his daughter, Mary, married into the Whiting family. Colonel Beverly Whiting, who came from the first historian of Virginia, Robert Beverly, who wrote the first history of Virginia. He descended from him. He lived at Elmington, the most beautiful home in Gloucester County. He married Mary Scaife, the granddaughter of this Edward Lewis, of the elder line of the immigrant, you see. They lived at Elmington, and their son was Captain John Whiting, who was the captain of a company of Gloucester militia, who under General Andrew Lewis, the head of the Virginia militia, drove the last royal governor of Virginia off of Gwynn's Island back to England. And they placed their cannons on the Lewis plantation, and the water in front of that plantation was called Milford Haven, which was the last bit of land that the Lewis people saw as they left Wales in front of Pembroke Castle. See, it all fits.
Well, I thank you for that, but I will get a copy of the tombstone, and I'll put it on this tape, so it'll be there.
That was what proved it, you see. It was published by the Virginia Historical Society. I think the first one was found in 48 and the second one in 54. It's been published. And that's when I started working on it, because you can believe the Virginia Historical Society.
Well, back on a little different subject now. In your book, you talk about King Arthur's court.
Yes.
Now, there are historians, some historians say there's evidence that King Arthur existed, and some say...
I proved it in my book by the calendar that the monks kept in the monasteries.
Okay, please tell me about that.
It has a record of the first battle of King Arthur against the Britons, the Battle of Baden in 522. And the record is in the monasteries. It's in the British Museum now. You look in my book and you'll see it. The British Museum has it, and it records that definite thing that Arthur carried on his shoulders the cross of it, the Holy Mary.
Okay, now the reason I raised this issue, I want to put this in the proper time frame of reference for the people who are viewing this tape. The Plantagenet kings of England start about the 6th century, don't they?
No, the Plantagenets. Wait a moment now. Henry II. No, up toward 1000 B.C. Magna Carta was 1215.
Right.
That was the grandson of the first Plantagenet.
And the Plantagenets started before William the Conqueror arrived in 1066. There were at least 2 of the kings before.
No, that's not true. William the Conqueror had a son, Henry I, who succeeded him. He was married to the Matilda, the Scottish princess that we talk about. They had a daughter who became the Matilda, also the empress of the German, wife of the German emperor, and he died and she came home, and she was married to the Count of Anjou, William, and from them came Henry II, and he got the name Plantagenet from his father's family. They got it from a little flower that they wore in their helmets in battle called the Plantagenesta, a little yellow wildflower, and it became the name of the family. That's the first time the Plantagenets were known under Henry II. You see, that was maybe later on, a little after 1200.
Okay, the point I wanted to get at is that most people think of King Arthur in the time frame of the 1200s.
That's not it.
But he existed in the 5th century, not the 12th century.
The end of the 5th and the beginning of the 6th.
So he existed at a point in time when the written records were less kept than what they did after William the Conqueror came, because William the Conqueror began the keeping of records with the Doomsday books and the like that had been...
So it was more or less tradition up until that point.
Right.
But it's so heavy, the tradition of the Bardic system, that you can't deny it any more than you can deny El Cid.
Because you find the references to it in the earliest records of the...
And in the Welsh records, I found a record that our ancestor of the Lewises, Caradoc, was spoken of as the cousin of King Arthur. And I traced King Arthur's pedigree back through books written by genealogists in Wales that were published quite recently in English, and his father was King Muiric, King of Gwent, which is exactly where the Lewises were. Gwent was then Monmouthshire, and on the tombstone in Gloucester, the man says he was born in Monmouthshire. There's no Monmouthshire now, it's Gwent, but that's the same territory, and that's where Arthur's kingdom was. His father's King Muiric of Gwent.
So you think what you say you proved in your book is that King Arthur was of Welsh descent?
Oh, of course, and he is historically a figure too.
Now,
but he's in all of the histories and the genealogies of Europe. Other countries named him.
Yes, other countries.
The Germans.
But he was king of the Welsh rather than king of the English.
He was never king of the English. He was a Welsh. He was a Welsh leader, dux. The Roman word for leader describes him. He united the Welsh tribes against the Aborigines and the Anglo-Saxons, who were the Britons. fighting the Britons. And he conquered them at the Battle of Badon in 522 and established his kingdom at Camelot, divided it into 3 parts, and the part of the Lewis ancestor fell to Cornwall. He was the Duke of Cornwall. But this is a fact in the history too. When Arthur died, he had no legitimate heir.
Right.
And the heir to his throne was Constantine, the son of our ancestor Caradoc. Do you believe me?
Yes, I happen to believe you. I do.
I wouldn't waste my time if it weren't true.
Well, I believe you for a variety of reasons. I've read your book, like you said. I have read a number of other histories, including some Welsh histories, which I finished last night, for one thing. And there are 2 things that impress me greatly. Number one, I became convinced as to the seriousness of your research by how well you documented what you did. That's the footnotes and the like. That says to me, here's a historian, and I like to consider myself as an amateur historian. I want to document.
It wasn't fiction.
Yeah, I want to document, and I was impressed with the quality of your research. And secondly, when you consider it in its totality, it all makes sense. It is a plausible explanation of how these things occurred or could have occurred, and that it makes sense to me. So yes, I'm inclined to believe it. Now, I can only go on faith and the fact that the records do show what they do.
And remember too that there's so few existing records.
Very much so.
The only thing you can do is to work with the existing ones and be logical and honest about evaluating them. The most valuable thing in genealogy is the human mind. Any fool can copy records, but it takes a good mind to evaluate them and put them together. Yes,
I know. I've just, like I said, I finished over 70 years of research to prove who my ancestor was, and it was not easy. And if it hadn't have been, frankly, if I don't mind bragging a little bit, hadn't have been the use of the mind in trying to figure out what possibilities could occur, I would never have found the proof that as to who my ancestor was.
And you insisted upon the truth.
Oh, I insisted upon the proof.
That's the only basic quality. That a good mind and integrity. The integrity is invaluable.
Well, I could have published my results
Lots of people
many years ago,
they wanted to be.
but I waited until I had the proof, black and white.
To deal with it's a profession. It's a profession, and you've got to play by the rules.
Well, being an amateur historian, that's what I learned when I went to college and studied history.
But I was a professional, you know. I was a genealogist for the Lee Society for a number of years.
Were you?
Until I found they had the wrong ancestor. And they did. And they're still hunting for the right one because they don't want to recognize the one that I found his baptismal record in Shire, England, where he said he came from.
Well, is there anything else you think you might like to tell me that you think the Lewis family people, and remember this is a Hill-Lewis family reunion.
There's no better pedigree in the whole world than that Arthurian-Lewis pedigree. They were top bracket in Wales, and that's why the man ordered his tombstone in that early age. He died in 1657.
That also indicated he had some wealth.
Well, he came from, yes, he was a mercer. He was the youngest sons of the gentry were in the guilds, and he was a guildsman. And in that capacity, he was appointed senior burgess because they were the beginning of the industrial empire of Great Britain, those guilds. They were highly honored. And they were the wealth of the nation, and that's why he was given the senior burgess title. But he was an old man, but he came from that beautiful blood, and he did not want his people to forget it. But you know the most important thing, Mr. Ford, no one values good genes and good blood any more than I do. But I told my sons it's very fine, but it's finer to act the part personally and individually. The onus falls on us to live up to them. And if we don't do that, then we shouldn't be talking about them.
I agree with you. In my book on the Ford family, in the epilogue, I put a quote in there that I happen to believe very strongly. And the quote is that to remember it's not as important where you come. The family that you come from is not as important as the family you're going to have.
Exactly, and you're merely a link in the good genes in the past,
Yes.
and hope that you pass on to the next generation the things that are important and that they live up to it. We say in Virginia, every tubby must stand on its own bottom. Have you heard that?
Yes, I have.
And that is true. It's very nice to come from fine people, but you have no right to talk about it if you don't live up to it.
Well, I at this point, I want to thank you for permitting me to come into your home.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you for this beautiful history of my family and your family that I believe the people at this reunion will treasure for years to come.
I sincerely believe that you come from Robert Lewis of Belvoir, Albemarle County.
Thank you.
Because I know his two sons went down to Brunswick in Pennsylvania and headed south from there. That is logical. But Mr. Ford, you've got to prove it.
I've got to prove it, and that's what I'm going to try to do. Now, lastly, I'd like to ask one last thing. May I take a few pictures of the Lewis crest and the Howell family material? Okay, I'm going to turn the camera off, and then we'll make rearrangements.
Now, I'll show you my coat of arms first that I worked in needlepoint. I did very good needlepoint. That was my second gift. Genealogy was first.
Okay, well, let's see that.
Lewis and Eleanor Bowles Goosh. She was the widow of the son of the governor of Virginia when she married. The Lewises operated on top level always.
And this is my ancestors.
No, ma'am, he's not. The Warner, Colonel Augustine Warner, who had 3 daughters, and one married the Lewis.
Oh, okay.
But you had the Warner blood in you, and he had the Warner blood too. But that's not your direct line.
All right. On that, if you don't mind, this is
I got those at Magna Carta in '65.
This is your Norman knight.
And my Saxon lady.
And your Saxon lady.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as a point of interest, one of the people that came with William the One of the people that came with William the Conqueror was a fellow by the name of Follett.
Follett,
And my Ford ancestor married a Follett.
Really?
Now, who is this up here on the wall, this tapestry?
This one?
Yes.
That was copied from a picture in the Louvre in France. It's called the Unicorn series. That's the finest piece I've done.
These are the coats of arms of the families of Wales.
Back 43 generations.
40?
But I didn't put them up until they were proven.
Uh-huh.
My sons put them up. I didn't put them up. They put them up.
Now this is the Lewis coats of arms.
On the tombstone of the immigrant.
Okay, and you got the colors.
As I did the genealogy and worked out the engraving in the Wales, I worked out the colors, and there they are.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. This is the Howell.
All right, explain the others.
This is the king of Glamorganshire, Justin ap Gwyront, the last native king of Glamorganshire, Wales.
Okay.
And this family is very peculiar, wonderful. It's another Lewis family. The wife of the immigrant was Joanna Lewis also, and she went back to the same line of Caradoc that her husband went back.
So John married his cousin?
He married a distant cousin,
Uh-huh.
Joanna Lewis. Now up here is my father's McLean of Duard.
Uh-huh.
And the red hand that is on the Lewis coat of arms in the Lewis is also up on his coat of arms.
I see.
That's why I like to think I was meant to work it out, because I have a double.
You have a double
line.
kinship.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Gainsborough.
You did the blue boy in needlepoint.
And pinky underneath.
How many needlepoints have you done?
106. I counted them once.
This is the Howell family home.
The whole family. The grandfather of our John Lewis was a Morgan, the Lord of Trilly, and he married Gwendolyn Howell, and that was her home.
Uh-huh. May I take a picture of you and your husband?
Yes, you certainly may.
This is the colonel.
They were painted by the outstanding artist in Germany at that time,
Uh-huh.
Kurt Weinhold.
And this is the Lewis family tree.
At Kenmore.
Uh-huh. That came from the Kenmore.
And this is the pedigree in Gloucester, from me back to the immigrant. My particular line.
This is your particular
My
line.
particular line.
Okay. Now here's another Lewis coat of arms. Which is this one?
Which one is
this one here?
This is, I worked in needlepoint 45 years ago and took to Germany and had it framed. It's the family of Gloucester, all the women who married into the Virginia Lewises and their coats of arms.
Oh, from the women who married
in Gloucester.
In Gloucester, Virginia.
Uh-huh. See, this way you have the Gloucester and the Welsh.
Ah. Well, again, Grace, I want to thank you so much for letting me come into your home.
You're quite welcome.
And
it was a pleasure meeting you, Mr. Ford, and I wish you well with your research.
Thank you, and I'm sure that the people who are going to be seeing this tape in October will be thrilled to have seen
Let
you.
me know how they received it.
I will do that.
My best wishes to them. Certainly a knowledge of your background is important. Not for pretentious reasons, but because it tells you what you're capable of doing.
How can you know where you're going?
If you don't know where you've been.
That's right.
Exactly.
Thank you.